back. If you've just joined us, you're watching the news at 10 on Channels Television, coming to you live from Lagos. A reminder of our top stories. House of Representatives asked executive to declare a state of emergency on insecurity in the country, calls for investigation into the setting up of super camps by the army in the northeast. President Buhari visits Borno State on return from AU summit in Ethiopia, commiserates with the state government over the Ondo attack on stranded travelers. Southeast governors adopt community policing strategy in tackling insecurity in the zone at a security summit with the Inspector General of Police and other stakeholders in Enugu. And Kenyan government promises to unite the country as the country's longest ruling president, Daniel Arap Moi, is buried. Plus, we'll have business, sports, news from Abuja, the FCT, and our international news will come from our studios in London. Now, our website, channelstv.com, has more information on our top stories and others. So subscribe and watch Channels Television's live stream on YouTube and other social media platforms using your mobile device browser. Or you can download the Channels TV app for Android and iOS devices from their respective stores. You can also watch us via your smart TV platforms on Apple, Android, Fire, and Roku TV as well. As the issue of security, that's regional security this time, gathers momentum, there appears to be some headway for the Amotekun security outfit as the Ondo state government has approved the proposal for its creation. In the same vein, the Ogun State Executive Council has also approved the proposal. The approval was given at the State Executive Council meeting, which held at the Governor's office in Abeokuta, the state's capital. At the end of the meeting, the state's Commissioner for Justice, Mr. Adegbolahan Adeniro, said the presentation of the bill before the State Council followed the earlier approval by the Attorney Generals and Commissioners of Justice of the 6 Southwest states.
We adopted a draft as amended for a bill for a law to establish the Ogun State Security Network Agency. Now, this agency is the agency that will be comprised of the Amotekun Corps. And this bill will be transmitted to the House of Assembly before the end of this week.
The Lagos state government has been reacting to the attendant effect of motorcycle and tricycle restrictions in the state. The Lagos State Deputy Governor, Mr. Obafemi Hamzat, on our Politics Today program, has explained that the restriction is in response to security of lives in the state. Mr. Hamzat further stated that an average of 28 people die monthly based on data from some government general hospitals as a result of motorcycle accidents. But with the latest restriction policy, the death rate has reduced to an average of 7. The Deputy Governor also added that motorcycles were being used as a means of transporting drugs to schools.
27 general hospitals in Lagos, 27 general hospitals. We have close to 3,000 private hospitals, but let's look at just the general hospitals. On the average, on a monthly basis, on the average, 28 deaths related to Okada.
Wow.
So we cannot as a government. So is it that people's lives don't matter? We now found out that the tricycle and the Okada now is now the vehicle for transporting drugs even to our schools. So the security of our lives, the prosperity of our children, we cannot just ignore it.
Let's cross over to Abuja now, and here's Ibrahim Adra. Ibrahim.
Many thanks indeed, Ijoma. Thank you for joining us. The United Nations Deputy Secretary General, Mrs. Amina Mohammed, is challenging Nigerians to take ownership of international treaties in order to ensure their sustainability. The former Minister of Environment was reacting to a question on what should be done to ensure effective implementation of treaties in Nigeria, especially the Convention on the Elimination of All Forms of Discrimination Against Women. She threw the challenge during a special program in Abuja as part of the events marking the United Nations 75th anniversary.
People will even bother to go to a state assembly. But that's where your women are getting beaten. That's where the gender bias, it's not in Abuja in the National Assembly, as important as it is. It's the local buy-in to the treaties and the agreements that we sign to get the laws changed so that you work your way up. And to stop always looking from top down. We agree in the UN, but when we come home, we need to own it so that it is sustainable. I've seen many pushbacks against rights today, human rights in the Charter that we all agreed to decades ago, but we're pushing back against them. Why? Because there's a lack of ownership. And when there's a lack of ownership, then we will see this tested over time. And so I think lots, again, more work for you to do as you try to make that glass half full. What can you do in the state assemblies? A strong state assembly voice has much more strength at the federal level than just us doing that. But for the UN, we're listening now, and I think we have to open up more spaces. We have to put more light on those countries that are not fulfilling their obligations. We have to share best practice, and perhaps to scale that up a little bit more. And
quality education is one of the 17 goals that make up the 2030 Agenda for Sustainable Development, developed by the United Nations. Goal 4 of the UN targets highlights education as one of the most powerful and proven vehicles for sustainable development, aimed at achieving inclusive and quality education for all. Now, the goal is to ensure that every boy or girl completes free primary and secondary education.
Achieving universal primary education in Nigeria is one target that has faced several challenges over the years. The challenges range from inadequate infrastructure to low quality of teachers and teaching aids. Added to this is the issue of the rising number of out-of-school children. High levels of poverty, armed conflicts and other emergencies have given room for more children to drop out of school, especially in the Northeast. Ongoing armed conflict and insurgency in that part of the country has seen an increase in the number of out-of-school children. According to the United Nations Children's Fund, 10.5 million children are not in primary school. Although it's free and compulsory, while the northern part of the country accounts for 8 million out-of-school children, the three worst hit states by insurgency in the Northeast account for 2.8 million children in need of education and emergency support.
Whatever data you choose to go with, 10.5 million, 13.2 million, or 12 million out-of-school children, we have an out-of-school children problem, which is one of the reasons why the Sustainable Development Goals in the first place was supposed to check. But currently, the amount we have of children out of school is whooping.
We must do everything humanly possible, everything politically possible, every movement we can make to ensure that all our children all over Nigeria, in the rural community, in the riverine areas, must return to school.
So what should be done to address the challenges in the sector?
There's a need for us to have policies that ensures that every child must be in school. Every child must, emphasis on the word must, be in school for us to be able to achieve sustainable goals. And another thing we really do not talk about is the learning outcomes. When children go to school, what do they learn?
It is difficult to meet the quality because the ingredients of quality promotion are not available. Visit our schools. What do you see? The dilapidated structures. We don't have aids for teaching and learning. We don't have conducive environments. Even the teachers are not given regular training.
The federal government's strategic plan for the education sector seeks to check exclusion from school through targeted funding that will address the impediments to the attainment of universal primary education.
Only education has the power to sustainably change society's behavior as necessitated by the challenge of global warming.
For the United Nations Children's Fund, government must prioritize education, target children who are least likely to receive an education, and develop a plan to address the systematic barriers that hinder the implementation of effective education strategy. What the relevant authorities will do to address these challenges will determine how far the country will go in meeting the UN target on education by 2030.
Now let's examine this issue further, and I'm being joined on the news at 10 by Malam Hamza Lawal, an activist, education analyst, and chief executive, Connected Development. Thank you for joining us on the news at 10.
Thank you for having me.
Now we have many children out of school for so many reasons. Chief among them is conflict in different parts of this country. Now, how do you think this has disrupted plan to stay on course with achieving the sustainable development goal for education?
Well, it has really affected plan, and we've seen that it has also added a lot of children that are meant to be in school are now out of school, and most of them are in the streets. And of course, we've seen cases where girls have been abused because of lack of adequate security or perimeter fencing in some of the schools. And of course, it has also added fears in these kids because they've experienced a lot of trauma from the attack in school environment. So this has really impacted Nigeria's achievement of the Sustainable Development Goal 4.
I guess you could tie that to targeted funding again. That has always been a problem for us. Many of the specialists we've spoken to would say government should move away from funding education to investing in education. Yes. Where do you stand on this?
We have to see it as an investment, because when we talk about the future of Nigeria and the future of children, if you only see it as taking money and putting in education, then we're not getting it right. If we see that as investment, then you're looking at it from an opportunistic perspective where private sector and even families, communities and households would also contribute their own quota, because when we invest, then it's more sustainable. There's a report by UNESCO that said Nigeria needs 37 billion annually to invest in education. And if you look at our budget, particularly national budget that is a bit open, we've not even met the 27% that was advised. So I believe that, and for us to achieve SDG Goal 4, we must also go back to the grassroots. What are local government and state government budgeting for education? Because there's an opportunity for UBEC to release matching grant. But how many states have accessed those funding? I believe also we need to review the UBEC Amendment Act, where as much as 12 years is compulsory, we need to look at how can we also increase funding. If states are saying we cannot provide 50% matching grant, why can't we give them 70% or 80% so they can provide 30 or 20% and access this funding?
Funding is only one of the several problems facing this sector, isn't it? You talk about infrastructure, you talk about the teacher quality and all those. In your view, what would the government be prioritizing?
I think for me it's data. Because if you want to look at learning outcome, do we have disaggregated data across Nigeria that looks at the quality of teachers and what the learnings are? If you also look at infrastructure, we're not only looking at building schools, but is this environment conducive? Do we have perimeter fencing? Do we have learning aids? Do teachers actually have provided with those learning aids? And you also need to look at nutrition. A lot of young children, for them to accelerate and get and grasp learning, they must have a sound mindset. So, and that would help in terms of providing them nutrition. I know that the school feeding program have done well, but we need to also accelerate and ensure that it's in the 36 states and the FCT.
Malam Hamza Lawal, thank you very much for joining us on this once again.
Thank you.
I truly appreciate that. When the news at 10 returns, Federal Inland Revenue Service launches intelligence system to track tax evaders